everyone, welcome back to my channel. Got a new light and a phone stand, so really excited about that. Hopefully this video has better lighting and the shelves don't look crooked in the background. In any case, this is my January wrap-up video. I had totally forgotten it was the end of January. I was living my life. My alarm went off at 2:45 so I could get up and run because that's who I am. Night shift has ruined me forever. But, and then I looked at the date and realized that not only is it my friend's birthday and we have like birthday plans today, but it's the last day of January and I need to film my wrap up. So let's get into it. So I read 11 books this month because my Goodreads goal for the year is 100 books. And I kind of freaked out that that's so many books and I didn't know if I was going to be able to read that many. So I just like went hard reading. And a lot of these books I read in like one day or like one night because I just sat down and it was like I have to read a book to like, because I have to be able to get to 100 books in a year and I don't want to get to the end of the year and be far behind and be trying to read like I have been this month at the end of the year with like the added pressure of 2021 coming up and I haven't met my goal yet. But now my friend Brittany at work is the reason that my goal is 100 because at first I had been kind of wishy-washy. I had said that I wanted to make my goal like 80 books and she was like, no, you read so fast. Like you can read 100 books in a year. So then I made that my goal and then I finished one of the books that I'm going to talk about tonight. It's like almost 400 pages long, but I finished it in a couple of hours really one night at work. And she was like, you should make your goal 125. So my goal is still 100 books, but I think if I do keep reading like this for the rest of the year, I'll end up surpassing it. But let's talk about the 11 books that I read this January. To start off with, I wanted to talk about a couple of books that I don't have with me because they were books lent to me. One of the books that I read was Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister by, what is his name? I forget his first name. Last name is Gregory Maguire, I think, who wrote Wicked and all of those books. I didn't really enjoy that book, but I didn't really hate it either. It was fine. I read it again in like a couple of days, gave it back to who lent it to me, but it wasn't anything special. I didn't love the characters. I didn't love the story. It was just engaging enough to like keep me going, and the characters were like just fine enough that I didn't like hate any of them, but I didn't super love any of them. It was just a completely middle of the road book. I think if you were more into historical fiction or fairy tale retellings, it might be more your cup of tea, but I'm not a huge fan of either one of those genres in particular. So for me, it just didn't speak to me. I didn't love it a lot. The other book that someone lent to me and I read was The Silent Patient. I totally cannot remember the author's name. I'm so sorry that I didn't like write that down. But The Silent Patient was a book I finished. I gave it 5 stars because I was like kind of blown away by the plot twist. I won't give anything away here, obviously. But now that like some time has passed and I look back on it, to me, it's more of like a 4.5 star read. It was really good. The pacing was great. I mean, the characters were complex characters. But at the end of the day, you know, I didn't really get a lot of takeaway from the story. I just read other books this month that I realized meant more to me than The Silent Patient, so I don't think The Silent Patient is truly for me a 5-star read. But I mean, I've done it before. I finish the book and I feel kind of blown away at the end and I rate it 5 stars, and then I look back and I'm like, it wasn't really a 5-star read. Like there were some things missing. So The Silent Patient to me was still a really good book. If you like thrillers, I would really suggest it. It was totally not what I expected. I'm so happy that I read it. But at the end of the day, it wasn't the best book ever. But I'm still happy I read it. So let's jump into now all the books that I do have that I read this month. So I read one nonfiction book this month, and I kind of like that. I think a good goal for me this year would be like one nonfiction a month, so I think I'm going to keep that going. But I read The Consequential Frontier, Challenging the Privatization of Space by Peter Ward. Rating nonfiction books is kind of hard for me, just because it's basically like, how much should they entertain me while educating me about my very niche interests? This book was fine. It wasn't bad. It wasn't very dry. It was pretty small, so I finished it fairly quickly. Really my biggest not really complaint, but just criticism, I guess, of this book is that this is a field that's growing so quickly. This book is set up, it has 3 parts. The first part is the past, the second part is the present, and the third part is the future. But, I mean, just with the speed of space travel and that kind of technology, I don't think that was a smart way to divide it, because the part that's like the present, well, now, I mean, after publication and now that I've read this book, like, that's already the past. And the third part, that's the future, I mean, that's rapidly approaching, if not covering topics that are like already occurring. I just think there had to have been a better approach to this book that didn't set it up so much in a linear timeline in, again, a field that's very quickly growing. Then, so the first 2 books that I talked about that I don't have were adult fiction books, and that made up the bulk of what I read this month. So I'll go ahead and go over my other adult fiction reads now, in no particular order. The first book that I read, actually this was, the first book I started in December, finished it this January, Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. This to me, like Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister, was a pretty middle of the road book. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great either. I mean, it wasn't what I expected from it, in that I thought it was going to be more of a thrill of the daughter, Bee, trying to find her mother, Bernadette, who like disappears to Antarctica, but really the book ends up being a lot more kind of satire almost of like the upper 1% living in Seattle, and all their petty like bickerings and issues. And then at the end, it is Bee looking for Bernadette in Antarctica, but it's like just a few pages of the book, and it's really not that thrilling. So this book was fine. It was a quick read. A lot of it is set up in the format of like emails or letters sent between characters. So it's quick. It's not heavy, but it wasn't really what I expected. It wasn't really what I wanted. I don't care about these socialites in Seattle and their private school drama and stuff like that. It just really wasn't my thing. I also read Roots by Alex Haley. This book I have kind of mixed feelings about, and I think that's kind of on par for what this book is. It was incredibly moving and just really astounding how Haley was able to track his family back and like connect these dots and then write this book that is just like about his family and everything that his family went through, but also really speaks to what African Americans in our country have gone through over the centuries. But for me, this couldn't be a 5-star read. Again, another issue of like it wasn't what I was expecting. A lot of this book, the majority of this book, focuses on Haley's like 5 times great grandfather, who was taken from Africa to be a slave, and to me that made the pacing of the novel a little weird, because it talks about like 5 generations, but I mean if like this much of it, or no, more than that, I'm sorry, if like over half of it is about the first generation in this story, he's the one that we know the best, and the other ones kind of get iffier and like fuzzier as you go. And then another one of his ancestors was like a chicken fighter. That doesn't sound right, but I can't think of anything other way to say it. And those chapters were incredibly boring to read about chicken fights. I'm sorry. So, I mean, this book was kind of hit or miss. in places. Overall, though, I'm really happy that I did read it. I've wanted to read this book for a long time, so I'm glad that I finally got around to it, and it was very interesting. It was very impactful, so I don't at all regret reading this book. It was pretty good, and if this sounds like something that interests you, you should definitely pick it up because it will be worth it. I also read The Sparrow Sisters by Ellen Herrick. This book I really didn't like. I think I just don't like magical realism because I didn't like, The Rules of Magic and Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman, that I think a lot of people who are into magical realism like. I just didn't really care for those books. And I thought it was just her storytelling style. And then I read this one and also didn't like it. But when I was looking at other reviews on Goodreads, I think that's kind of a general consensus that this book is not really great. The characters are so vanilla, and there is a hate to love romance in this book. And I read another book that I'll talk about later this month that was a hate to love romance, and I loved it. And the other book did it well. This one did it horribly. The characters went from like the male, I don't even remember his name, but the man was like interested in the woman, like he thought she was really pretty and was just like intrigued by her, but she was like really hesitant of him, didn't really like him, wasn't being friendly to him. And so it went from them not being friendly or cordial really with each other to them sleeping together. And it didn't really make sense to me. It didn't really like build the story at all or build the characters in any way. And it was just overall disappointing. There was like no plot for the first half of the book. And then when Herrick remembered like there has to be a point to this story, it was kind of meh. And the whole novel focuses a lot around like the male love interest is the doctor. So there's like a big focus on medicine. And then also the legal system, because the main character, the female, ends up getting accused of not murder, but like basically gets accused of murder. So there's a lot of the legal system as well. And it just seemed to me like Herrick doesn't really understand the medical field or the American legal system. And it was just handled like clumsily, and it felt like it was being written by someone who didn't really understand those things. I could be totally wrong. Maybe I was just mad about the book in general, but that's how it felt. So I didn't really like this book. And I did something when I got this book, I did something I never do, where I buy the next book in the series before I've read the first book that I have. And so of course I didn't like this one, but I have the other ones, and I'm probably going to muddle through it next week as well. I mean, it's a short book. It didn't take me long to read. It was just not great, and I'm not really looking forward to reading the sequel, but I already spent money on it. It's on my like TBR shelf, so I guess that's what we're doing now. I also read The Library of the Unwritten by A.J. Hackwith. This book, I wanted to love this book. Even as I was reading it, I was like, I want to love this book. The main character is a woman of color. She's pansexual, I think. And the premise is so intriguing. It's like every story that people write and don't finish gets sent to the library in hell. And the main character is like the librarian here, and the stories, the unfinished stories can come to life. They have characters that can escape, and it's kind of her job to put characters that escape back in their stories. And that premise sounded like it could go really good or it could go really bad, and I don't think it really went either way, honestly. There was just a lot of world building really that went on, because it has different like realms of afterlife. So there's just a bunch of like realms that the characters go to, and there's a lot of characters and a lot of information, and overall it was just a lot to process. And I mean, now that I'm trying to describe this book, I can't really remember much of the plot. I just it was kind of confusing. There was a lot going on. It is a series. I did like this enough that I think I would pick up the second one, but before I read it, I would have to read a synopsis on the first one to remind myself of what happened. I think if you're into shows like The Good Place and Supernatural, this would be something that would kind of grab your interest. But I don't know. This is not a book that I can really highly recommend. It's just fine. Then I read, I'm not going to even attempt a Spanish accent. I'm so sorry. I'm just not. It's like 5 a.m. I'm not doing that. Taurus by Carolina de Robertis. Sorry. This book was so beautiful. I really enjoyed it. I think if you're a member of the LGBT community, it would really speak to you. It's about a group of gay women in Uruguay. Okay, I was really scared I was going to say the wrong country. Back in the 70s, revolution is happening in their country at this time. And they end up, this group of friends buys a house at a beach where they can escape to go together to be true to themselves. And it's just basically about their friendship over the years, how things change in the country, how human rights change over the years, their different love interests. It's just a really beautiful story about being true to yourself and how people can be hurt by not being able to be their truest self. So I highly recommend this book for sure. I loved it a lot. Taurus. So the next book I'm going to talk about is currently my favorite book, The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. I loved this book. I kind of can't get over how much I love this book. At first when I started reading it, it wasn't what, I keep saying this, it wasn't what I expected. I really need to read the summaries of books over again before I just crack the spine. But at first when I started reading it, the main character is only 13 years old. And I had kind of gone into this thinking more adult fiction, and this is definitely, I think, an adult book. So I was confused by a 13-year-old main character. Time passes in the novel. She gets older as the story goes, but a good chunk of it, she is 13. So at first I really thought it wasn't going to be what I expected, because it's about this girl who moves, her father moves her and her mother up to Alaska because he randomly inherits this homestead from one of his friends from Vietnam. So it is the 70s and they move to Alaska. And her father is just the worst. He's it is because he has untreated PTSD, as many veterans of Vietnam did. But he's abusive, he's paranoid, and it's just a crazy story about the main character and her mother trying to deal with with her father and their husband, and how the community gathers around to protect them, not only from the harsh winters and the harsh landscape of Alaska, but also from this man who is just a danger to society. And it's a really beautiful story, I think, about the love that we have for other people, not just romantic love, but familial love. And I definitely think if, you're somebody who maybe doesn't have the best family, or you've ever been in a bad relationship, I think the struggles of these characters will speak a lot to you and really resonate with you. And if you're an outdoorsy person, I think Hannah's writing of Alaska is so beautiful. I finished the book and I was like, I want to go to Alaska today. I hate being cold, but I want to go so bad just to see what she describes in this book. So I loved the characters. I loved the story. I will say it's a pretty heavy book. The topics it covers are not light, easy beach reading kind of topics. I think you need to be in the right headspace for it. Bad things happen and then they get a little better and you're like, okay, things are getting better now. It can't get any worse, and then they get worse. I cried multiple times reading this book. I just just love this book a lot. I really think that maybe not everyone should read it, but everyone that I know should read it. It's really good. Now moving on to my only two YA reads this month. First, I'm going to talk about Queen of Hearts by Colleen Oakes. In case you haven't noticed, I've been on kind of a schedule where I post 2 videos a month. So my wrap-up video that comes out at the beginning of every month, and then like another random video halfway through the month. My second video this month is going to be a rant review on this book, which might be the worst book I've ever read. Probably the worst book that I've ever read all the way through. And I was only able to do it because it's only like, it's less than 300 pages. It's like 280 something pages. And I mean, I was getting so pissed off at this book. I was like, I have to finish it so I can talk about how terrible it was from start to finish. So I have recorded right now like over 20 minutes of footage that I have to edit to post the video that is a rant review of this book. So I won't go much farther into this because I do talk about it at such great length in another video. But I hated this book. I don't recommend it. Please stay tuned for that video. And the last book that I have to talk about is Starflight by Melissa Landers. This book was no The Great Alone. Okay? It didn't make me cry. I'm not gonna rant about this in the streets. But this book was still really good and enjoyable, I thought. I loved the characters. I thought the story was super fun. And the writing was fine. It wasn't like lyrical, poetic, beautiful. But I really liked this book. It's about a girl who has like been accused of crimes, and she's trying to get to, it's a sci-fi novel, and she's trying to get off Earth and go to like outskirt planets where it won't matter that she has this criminal past, and she's a really good mechanic, so she just wants to like get off Earth, go to the outskirts of the like galaxy, I guess. Be a mechanic, but the only issue is she has no money, she doesn't have a way to get there, so she ends up, it's just like an adventurous book. She ends up teaming up with this guy who's like wealthy and kind of spoiled, or that's how she sees him, and they end up going on like all these wacky space adventures and like end up being space pirates. It's just so cool and fun. If you're looking for like a YA read that's like a YA sci-fi that's just light and fun, and this is the book that I was talking about that has a good hate to love romance. Like at first the characters like totally don't get along, like they come from different classes, and they just think that each one thinks that they're better than the other one for different reasons, but they have so much character development over the time of the story that they just grow together, and it's organic and it makes sense and it's so great. This book is a decent read. I mean, if you like sci-fi, I think you'd have a lot of fun with this book. Yeah. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching today. Please stay tuned for that rant review video later this month. I appreciate all the support.